Welcome, friends and comrades, to another Revolutionary Hour interview segment. Tonight, we'll be discussing with Shabbir Rizvi the Iranian dimension of imperialism's genocidal war on Palestine and the recent visit of Cuban President Diaz-Canel to Iran to deepen Cuba-Iran ties. I will also discuss the story of the recent Israeli racist at the bottom of all the Hamas rape allegations. Then we will hear from Noah Khachvik on whether there will be forceful confrontation pushed by U.S. imperialism against the Venezuelans for their incorporation of Essequibo. We will also discuss with Noah the likelihood of Biden openly sending American troops to fight Russia and what that means for us working class Americans. Lastly, I will be discussing the poverty of the liberals' condemnation of Palestinian resistance to apartheid and occupation. The Midwest Remarks Institute is a grassroots-funded project. Consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/MidwestRemarks to help finance our counter-hegemonic educational institute. If you are watching us live and would like to help us financially, consider sending us a super sticker donation, or if you have any questions, a super chat. Without further ado, let's get started, as we always do, with the glorious International. Alrighty, man. There's nothing like getting started with the International and then Dr. King. I'm joined today by good comrade Shabbir Rizvi, who's a political analyst and anti-imperialist organizer specializing in geopolitical developments and U.S. foreign politics. He's someone who I've been hoping to have on the show for a very long time. We've been publishing his work for quite a while. So thank you so much for coming on, Comrade Shabbir.
Thank you for having me, comrade.
So the first question I wanted to ask you, the economist Michael Hudson views the current genocidal war on Palestine as the U.S.'s opening of a third front against Iran, one of the countries our empire considers to be part of the triad of evil, along with, of course, Russia and China. Iran, of course, is almost always in the Western mainstream media news, hanging around like a sort of boogeyman in the discussion of Palestinian resistance. Is it correct to say that the war on Palestine is, at least in part, a component of a larger imperialist push against Iran?
I would say absolutely. I mean, let's talk about it from day one. Day one of Iran's Islamic Revolution in 1979. Day one, Ayatollah Khomeini issued a statement that said that we will always back Palestine and that we will never recognize the Israeli state, and that one of the main components of the Islamic Revolution in Iran is to get rid of this colonial entity known as Israel and all other colonial entities in the region as well. So right from the get-go, you know that Iran won't stand for Israel. Israel will not stand for Iran. Now, in the context of what Michael Hudson is saying, one, Iran has throughout the years experienced horrific sanctions, horrific attempts to undermine its processes, undermine its economy, overthrow its leaders. And within that, it's been self-sufficient and hasn't really relied on other countries at all for its development. This has led to Iran kind of cultivating its own economy, creating its own economic ties based on its own kind of demands, as we see kind of, its strengthening partnership with Russia, with China, with its entry into BRICS, with its entry into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And so what we see now is that Iran stands as this economic powerhouse, a developing economic powerhouse, but more so it's become what we call a regional power. Now, the United States, as it tries to grow its hegemonic power, is definitely looking into obviously throwing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars into Israel. I always call Israel the 51st state. Israel is kind of the gateway for the United States into the region. And if you recall Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations General Assembly just a few months ago, he had a map of what he called the New Middle East. By the way, Palestine was completely erased. He just had Israel on it. And he talked about specifically the Abraham Accords, and he talked about specifically trade routes. And now what that means is the only way that this state, this illegitimate state of Israel, is planning to sustain itself right now is through basically U.S. economic intervention. But in order for it to justify itself, it needs to be able to expand and play in harmony with the other states in the region. Now, we have some states, like, for example, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, that capitulated to Israel, right? They, turned their backs on the Palestinian cause and they capitulated to Israel. But then you have some states that stand as a literal physical blockade to Israel. And so it's not a matter of fact that, they're going to want war with Iran. It's the fact that this war is ongoing. It's happening right now. And the fact of the matter is the war is not between just Israel and Iran or America and Iran. It's about the complete global imperial system versus the global majority, what we would call the global south. So yes, I would definitely agree with what Michael Hudson would have to say there.
That's such an important component, brother, because, there's a lot of our friends who have been extremely critical of the Zionist project, who are critical of the genocide that Israel is waging with U.S. funding and equipping on the people of Gaza, but who don't have the systematic analysis because they're not rooted in the Marxist tradition that can clearly see how the imperialist system is bound to produce catastrophes, as the one we're seeing right now waged on the Palestinian people. I wanted to move to another section of the discussion on Iran. Cuban President Diaz-Canel recently visited Iran, where he met with President Ibrahim Raisi and the Ayatollah Khamenei. What was the purpose of this visit? What agreements were reached between the two countries, and how have the relationships between Cuba and Iran developed in the last few years?
Yes, definitely an interesting thing to analyze, especially right now. Because if you look at the history of both countries, one, they started off by overthrowing a US-backed dictator that essentially was a comprador. It was a comprador regime. And throughout the years, of course, they enjoyed warm relations, but not so much as warm as they enjoy today. There's numerous pictures you can find of Fidel Castro meeting with Ayatollah Khomeini. There's numerous pictures of him meeting with various Iranian presidents. But right now, I think we're going to see an increase in relations, particularly between the Raisi administration and Diaz-Canel's administration. But why now? Why is that so important, right? Well, let's actually take a look. Let's take it a few steps back. A lot of critics of, let's say, anti-imperialist countries always criticize that these countries, invest so much into military, invest so much into weapons, invest so much into arms and things like that. Why don't they focus on their people? Now, we both know that that's a liberal take. It's not a very rooted in science take, right? So let's actually play this out, right? Let's say Iran and Cuba try to enjoy warm economic relations as they do now, let's say 10 years ago. Let's say Iran sends a fleet of much needed, let's say Iran sends like multiple, ships of much needed resources to Cuba, right? It has oil, it has, pharmaceutical stuff, it has, just basic technology that, Cubans can't take for granted, right? What happens the moment that they leave the Red Sea? Boom, you're going to have the United States Navy all over you. They're going to be stealing your ship. In fact, right now, as I'm speaking, there is a stolen Iranian goods off the Gulf of Mexico. Basically, the oil barons of the United States are considering taking it. But the one thing that now stands in its way, and this is exactly what I'm getting to, is that Iran now has a navy that's capable of actually protecting its goods, that's able to sail across the world. In May of this year, I believe it was the 82nd or the 86th Fleet of the Iranian Navy completed a worldwide flotilla, went all across the world, therefore proving that it has the ability to navigate from one part of Earth to the other back unharmed. Now, what does that add to the equation? That basically is a huge security guarantee. Cuba can send Iran millions of dollars to say, hey, can you send us this? But if there's no security guarantees, that is a bad investment. That is a terrible investment. And so what Iran has done is that slowly but surely has beefed up its navy, has beefed up its air force, as we just saw, actually just wrote about this a few days ago, the purchase of Russian Su-35s, which is a game changer for the region. And now what Iran can do is say, hey, Cuba, we're actually going to trade with you. We're going to trade with Nicaragua. We're going to trade with Venezuela. And there's nothing the United States can do about it unless it wants to get smoked in its own waters. There you go. And so what we're seeing in this new, what we call multipolar world, is the ability for these countries that have been so ruthlessly sanctioned, so ruthlessly strangled by the United States, that have been blatantly, raided by the United States. There are millions of dollars worth of stuff stolen. Now we're seeing that equation beginning to kind of change. Now we have security guarantees. Now we have different countries being able to actually trade very openly. And let's talk about this too, right? Cuba is completely isolated, mostly by the West, right? Every year we see the UN vote where the entire world says, hey, let's unblock Cuba, and the United States and Israel say no, and the Ukrainian government, because they're ran by a bunch of spineless cowards, abstain. And so what happens then? The United States basically has complete domination over the West. The West is where all the pharmaceuticals lie, or the West is where all the technology rights lie. The West is where everything that actually needs a patent lies, until now. Because now countries like Iran that have maintained self-sufficiency for so long, and Cuba that has maintained self-sufficiency for so long, but could not trade because of the peril at sea, are now able to trade. And so what we're going to see, not only just now, but even in the months to come, actually started this spring when President Raisi did a 3-country tour of Latin America. He went to Cuba, he went to Venezuela, and he went to Nicaragua. Now we're going to see more established relations between countries within the global South, which to the not well-versed reader would be like, well, why don't these people just trade together? Now they can actually trade together and actually have the security guarantees needed in order for both of their economies to thrive.
That's such an important point, brother, because we've seen it, with the shipments to Venezuela, where the U.S. just like pirates, it's like modern day pirates. They just take it and then give it to their oil barons. And that development, the role of developing the securities of a country, the ability to protect itself militarily against the forces of imperialism is so important. That's why Zhou Enlai, when he lays out the 4 modernizations that end up becoming a central focus of the reform and opening up period in China, besides the forces of production, besides science and technology, besides agriculture, you have the defenses of a country, so that these securities can be put in place and allow for fruitful trade amongst folks in the anti-imperialist camp. The next question I wanted to ask you is that I think it becomes clear to anyone who can see 2 fingers in front of their face that we're witnessing the rise of a new post-hegemonic, multipolar, if we're with Chavez, pluripolar world. But one that is also quite ideologically heterogeneous. What role do you think these ideologically diverse nations, such as Iran, Cuba, Russia, China, Venezuela, play in helping to usher in a new world order?
I think Xi Jinping said this best. I'm going to completely butcher this quote. But he said that true democracy is the ability of people to be able to practice their own form of democracy and what they deem is right and what they deem is culturally valuable. And what I think this ushers in is basically the acceptance that you don't have to practice Western liberalism in order to be considered a democracy. Democracy is what the majority of people within a state agree to what they want to be governed by, agree to the cultural norms that they want to be governed by. It might be unpopular with another state, a certain cultural or political practice, but if one state likes it, then that's totally fine. Here's a great example of that. Let's actually go back to Iran and let's go back to Cuba, right? Many people kind of write off the Iranian Revolution because it was considered anti-Marxist. In my opinion, the Iranian people just had a bad tent with Marxism because the majority of Marxists during the revolution were trucks, and then of course there was one of the mistakes that we have to be critical of the Soviet Union for was arming Saddam to bomb Iran, which is ultimately why Iran did not like the communists or did not like Marxism, quote unquote. Although a lot of policies within its specific economies could be attributed to socialist policies, but that's a whole other thing of its own, right? So just knowing that kind of background and context and cultural take on Marxism from certain Iranians, why would they do business with communist Cuba? Why would they do business with communist Venezuela? Why would they do business with communist China? It doesn't make sense, right? Well, that's actually where you have it completely wrong. What we're seeing is, the global unifier here is the ability to be sovereign, the ability to do what you feel is right for your nation. And as long as another nation isn't infringing on said rights, we can totally work together. This is completely contrary to, the Western dominated neoliberalism that we see today, where if you don't have this and that in your voting booth, and if you don't have such and such as delivers, and if you don't have this and that, private corporations, looking at you throughout all hours of the day and this and that surveillance state, then you're not, considered a true democracy, right? And that's kind of like the Western way. It's a really, childish way that I just really put it. But what I'm trying to say is essentially that, the world doesn't need to abide by, the definition of democracy that the West has made for itself, while, maintaining this authoritarian rule over its own people. And so with this emerging new world order, we're going to see a lot of different ways that what we'll see democracy, that what we call democracy, be practiced as. And I think one thing that, we as Marxists have to keep in mind is that we have to be kind of open-minded about the way different states practice what they call democracy, but because it all relates down to what the people's struggle there is and their kind of relationship to the state, their relationship to, the people's relationship to the means of production, the people's relationship to imperialism, and how they go about conveying that and how they go about navigating that.
100%. I couldn't possibly agree with you more. Here at the Institute, we're very big critics of what we call the purity fetish. This idea that's prevalent in the Western left that if something doesn't measure up to the pure idea I have of it in my head, I'm going to condemn it. And you find that to be the case very much so with not just socialist countries existing outside of the sphere of influence of empire, but not explicitly socialist or not explicitly communist countries that are playing a historically progressive role in the fight that they're waging against a currently U.S.-led imperialism. I wanted to switch to our next question, which requires me to pull up quite a few different things. The first one is a study that confirms from UNICEF that Israel has killed nearly 9,000 children. And I think a lot of these numbers are quite low, but when you see the numbers of deaths being brought into question by mainstream media, it's usually because they're doing some BS tactic like, well, it comes from the Hamas health institutions who are telling us, how many people have died. In reality, there's tens of thousands of people under the rubble that haven't been found yet and therefore cannot yet be confirmed dead. So whenever you see even these numbers, it is likely that it's a lot less. But in conjunction with that, just to set the table for the next couple of comments, recently Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin said the following. Let's play this and then I have one more clip to show before I ask you the question.
This kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative.
So there's the U.S. empire speaking in terms in which it wasn't, almost 60 days ago, describing the potential or the actuality of a strategic defeat that could be had by Israel. And then this came out, I believe, today. This is UN National Security Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter to urge the Security Council to force a ceasefire on Israelis' genocidal war in Gaza. So, Comrade Shabbir, what I wanted to ask you is, basically, it's extremely clear that the vast majority of the world, those not included when the U.S. and its lackeys speak about the international community, which we know it's reduced to the 14% of the world that colonized the rest of the planet, but the vast majority of the global South and the vast majority of the citizens within the global North itself, within the heart of the empire in our country, the vast majority of people are in favor of a ceasefire. And the vast majority of the world is in favor of even more than a ceasefire, is in favor of an end to the occupation and the apartheid state of Israel as it currently exists. So how do you see this playing out? How long can the genocidal war against the Palestinians last in the face of such global condemnation and such clear defeat in the information war?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that a lot of people are asking. Let me actually start off by talking about the UN Charter or whatever resolution they passed. You can invoke the Charter and you can pass the resolution. Israel has broken over 65 resolutions since its inception. So, if you can pass the resolution, that's great. But are they going to abide by that? Probably not. Let's talk about a ceasefire. Sure, we can have a ceasefire. And I agree with the ceasefire. I agree with the stoppage of the Israeli bombs, or rather the U.S.-made bombs dropped by Israel. Obviously stopping from bombing the Gaza Strip. But I think more importantly, what it comes down to is those bombs are going to stop dropping again, right? They're going to continue dropping. The occupation doesn't end there. The siege of Gaza doesn't end there. Even before the war started, Gaza didn't even have pure water. Most of its water was contaminated. Very few materials are allowed into the strip. They don't get construction materials. They don't even get basic medicine in order to get life-saving surgery for even having cancer. It's a months-long process, and oftentimes at the end of that months-long process, you're denied from even leaving, right? So what it comes down to is, sure, you can have your ceasefire, you can have your temporary ceasefire, or whatever you want to call it, but the fact of the matter is it's an ongoing genocide. And the only way you're going to solve that equation is by the complete dissolution of the occupation. There's no other way around it. There's no other way that this equation can be solved. The fact of the matter is that Israel is a very, very expensive investment, and there's no return on investment. Let's actually look at it from the aspect of the bourgeoisie. Let's put our best capitalist hat on and think about this. We are pouring billions of dollars into our 51st state, and what does our 51st state do? It's a PR catastrophe. There's no products being delivered. We have to constantly make excuses for it. Meanwhile, they're killing kids. They're making up stories, so their PR department is trash because they can't even make up a good lie. A literal state that's built on lies cannot do the one thing that it was built on, and that's lie. It's even failing at that. And so what does that mean? One, there's no other way. You have to eventually the United States is eventually going to have to cut off its military aid or do something. It's going to be either publicly pressured or just not going to see a return on investment. It's going to hold on until its last breath. But rest assured, they will have to let go of this. Two, the only way that this really ends, the only way, like I said, this really ends is the victory of the Palestinian people over the Zionist occupation. There is no other way that will permanently solve this other than the defeat of Israel. And what's going to happen now, in at least the short term, and that's three, there's no other way to look at it. Israel's going to lose this. Why? Because if the entire world is telling them to have a ceasefire, for example, right? They already laid out their plans. They already laid out their strategic objectives. They want to wipe out Hamas. So what does a ceasefire mean? The world is pressuring Israel to lose is the way that they're looking at it. And they're going to have no choice but to toss the glove. Because what's happening right now, as I'm speaking, I'm getting notifications of the latest Al-Qassam video hitting the internet with these guys just walking up to tanks and blowing the living shit out of them. dude, you cannot win against these people that are so committed to the liberation of their homeland. Meanwhile, you have a diaper army that runs away at the slightest, knock on a door. You cannot win this. You cannot beat the Palestinian people. And no charter is going to save the Palestinian people. No outside intervention is going to save the Palestinian people, because it's going to be the Palestinian people that heroically tell the world that this is how you deal with occupation. This is going to set off a chain reaction of anyone else that is currently under any U.S. or otherwise other imperialist occupation, and shit's going to get real. And that's what I think we can expect in not only the coming years, but the coming days.
Beautifully said, brother. That's how Algeria liberated itself. That's how the Irish liberated themselves. That's how many of the other great anti-colonial revolutions liberated themselves. And I think you couldn't be more right. Israel is, as we've been talking about it, a colonial outpost for American imperialism in the region, and it's been bearing very little fruit besides PR catastrophes, and it hasn't been able to achieve any of the objectives, or a good number of the objectives that it exists for, and all it brings is more a rather radical intensification of the delegitimation of the imperialist system that Israel is very evidently one of the key components of. Brother, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. We're going to have to bring you back on soon. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we send you on your way?
Yeah, I got two things for your audience. So whether you prefer Twitter or Instagram, get on that right now. I'm going to give you two things. So one, you're going to type in March on RNC 2024, because all that shit's happening. So that's March on RNC 2024, Twitter or Instagram, X or Instagram. And then two, just because we love to give equal love, you're going to type in March on DNC 2024. That's on Instagram and Twitter. March on DNC. So if you hate one more than the other, great. Follow both. See what's up.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a duopoly. They both serve the same master. So screw them both. They don't serve us. They serve our enemy. The ruling class. Thank you so much for coming on, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll see you soon.
See you, brother. Bye-bye. All right. That was Comrade Shabbir. A lot of important topics discussed. The next thing I wanted to discuss is something we had covered in the last Alone stream I did, which I believe was Sunday. A few recent developments have come out concerning the alleged rape story. So Sunday we covered this. CNN report claiming that sexual violence on October 7th relied on non-credible witness, some undisclosed ties to the Israeli government. And one of the things that we pointed at was how evidently rooted in racist, anti-Arab tropes these narratives are. And we discussed one of the tweets from Institute professor Danny Shaw, who said, "You want to talk about tropes? The myth of the, quote, savage Arab rapist was the foundation of Orientalism, which provided the racist ideological justification for the white man's burden and colonialism. Its modern iteration is Islamophobia. The fake rape charges are the next phase of disinformation against Gaza and Palestine." And we also covered this in the context of the hypocrisy of imperialism and the projection of imperialism that always blames its enemies in a very baseless way for doing what it itself promotes. So there's no evidence at all for Hamas promoting rape of women anywhere, or actually executing the rape of women in October 7th. However, what we do have evidence of is of leading rabbis invoking holy text to legitimize both the killing of babies, but also the rape of enemy women. So here's a post from Dan Cohen where he says, Amid Eyal Karim's appointment as Israeli military chief rabbi, scandal erupted over his writings permitting soldiers to rape women during wartime. 150 Zionist rabbis wrote in support of him. So it's not just him, it's not just one wacko. It's not an outlier. It's a part of the systematic core of this racist, supremacist ideology of Zionism, stating that, quote, the attempt to disqualify the rabbi's appointment due to his legitimate Torah positions is an attempt that will severely harm the entire Torah world in the state and the state of Israel and the Israeli occupational forces. Karim is now a brigadier general giving spiritual guidance to Israeli soldiers terrorizing Gaza. So if that wasn't enough, and last time we saw the clips of the Zionists harassing Medea Benjamin, who was calling for ceasefire at the protest, and saying absurd things like, we wish you to be raped, that it be recorded and sent to your mother. So all of these horrible things that they, in a very evidently racist manner, project onto the Palestinians, it's actually themselves, the ones that are often guilty of doing and promoting. But just to have a little bit more evidence to the thesis that a lot of these positions are rooted in racism. And of course, when you hear me say they're rooted in racism, that means that they're rooted in this ideological phenomenon that becomes an epiphenomenal reality of imperialism and capitalism. That means that it becomes a reality that is necessary for the smooth reproduction of the existing capitalist and imperialist, thereby relations of production. So when I say rooted in racism, always think it's rooted in the system that needs racism in order to perpetuate its ends of accumulating capital. But here is one of the central sources for the thesis of Hamas rape allegations. May Golan, a key source, as Loki says, shout out to Loki, for BBC rape claims against Palestinians. Here she is. Let's listen in to what she has to say.
They were burned, they were without organs, they were butchered completely, they were slaughtered to the core. You had heads roaming around, you had breasts of women roaming around, and yeah.
So that narrative goes on questions, not just by the people speaking it, but by the people hearing it, because you already have these ideological presumptions of what Arab people are like, of what the non-European, non-white people are like. And those presumptions allow you so that when you hear stories like this, your stomach turns, you get all emotional, you lose all capacity to reason, and then you consent to a genocidal war that if you were able to see it with plain eyes and without this ideological baggage getting in the way of actually seeing the reality, you would never consent to, because it's horrific, it's anti-human, and anyone with the slightest bit of humanity can recognize that. But let's to confirm this thesis, let's see what this lady has to say.
I just wanted to focus a bit more on...
We're racist because we want to preserve our lives and our sanity. So I'm proud to be a racist, and it is our right to be racist. If I'm racist in order to preserve my life, then I am proud. There you go. Explicitly saying how racist they are. And this is not new. We saw a couple of days ago outside of this massive conference in, I believe, Colorado. We covered it on Sunday's stream. A couple gentlemen, I don't even know if you can call them that. One of them opened their shirt and kill all sand N-words with a hard R. Extremely racist, supremacist folks. And that's the reality of the Israeli settler colonial apartheid state. It's very tragic, but it's something that in the Palestinians fighting against, they're not just fighting for their own emancipation. We on the left, we often paint it too narrowly. Palestinians are not just fighting for their own freedom, even though they are doing that. But in that fight against the most reactionary, or one of the most reactionary points of the imperialist web, they're fighting for humanity at large. They're fighting against the greatest enemy of humanity, which is this cancerous, life-devouring capitalist imperialist system. Palestine fights for all of us. It fights for our freedom in fighting for its own emancipation. With that, I would like to go to our next guest. It's hard to even call him a guest. You know him very well. my brother from another mother, Noah Khachvik. How are you doing, brother?
Good. I'm good. A little tired. It's getting late for me. How are you today, brother? I've been listening in backstage here. Good stuff. I mean, you're not wrong in fighting the global financial parasite. Palestine is fighting for all of us, and frankly, we're falling behind in this fight, brothers and sisters. I think it's time we set aside all that pettiness and bickering and childishness that's been rampant on the left for way too long, because things are getting serious. It's time for us to organize right now, and it's time for us to educate ourselves right now, because we need to get in this fight. No one is better situated to take down the ruling class that lives here in our country than the American working class is.
Beautifully said, brother. And with that, I'd like to plug, for those that haven't already, make sure to sign up to the Educate Against Genocide class. You can find it at midwesternmarks.com. And you can join for $10. You can donate more if you want, but it's a very interesting space. We're going to have tomorrow Dan Cohen talking to us about his experiences and travels to Gaza. So make sure to hop on that. But Noah, I wanted to bring you on to discuss a couple things. First off is Venezuela. After a popular vote, they were able to incorporate Guyana Essequibo as its 24th state, a region that was a part of Venezuela before it was, basically illegally or imperialistically given to British Guyana. And this is the new map of Venezuela now that it has incorporated its rightful 24th state. I wanted to ask you, considering the interests of U.S. imperialism and ExxonMobil and the rich crude oil reserves in the region, which were discovered in 2015, do you think it is likely that forceful confrontation will be propped up by the Exxon-controlled Guyana government in the interest of U.S. imperialism?
Yeah, I was just talking to RT about this. I don't think so, because if we think about it, who are the forces propping up Exxon, right? Why is Exxon even there? Why now? Why is this push happening now, right? And it's because they discovered oil in the region, right? But what are the institutions these oil cartels use to carry out their will? It's the American government and military. It is the EU soft power, things like this, right? And these are all already occupied, losing a proxy war in Ukraine and attempting to exterminate the Palestinian people. They don't have much sort of propaganda goodwill left to them, as they're just abysmally losing the PR war in Palestine. And militarily, they're overextended already. Opening up a third imperialist theater right now is just terrible tactics militarily,
Yeah, brother, I couldn't agree more with you. And it just so happens that this year is the 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine. And I wanted to play for everyone a clip from Southcom's Laura Richardson shamelessly reiterating Monroe Doctrine talking points with regard to the future that she would like to see out of the region and its collaboration with U.S. imperialism. And I think it reminds me every time I see stuff like this of a famous quote from Jose Marti, specifically his famous essay, Nuestra América, Our America, where he says that los árboles se han de poner en fila para que no pase el gigante de las siete leguas. The trees ought to put themselves together, ought to align themselves so that the giant of the 7 leagues don't pass. The only way to defeat American imperialism, the Monroe Doctrine, the doctrine that likes to that think of South America, Central America, the Caribbean as simply the backyard of U.S. imperialism, or in Biden's new formulation, the front yard. It's no longer the backyard, but now it's the front yard. The only way to defeat that is through Latin American, Pan-American unity against imperialism. And for us, the revolutionary agent within the belly of the beast, as Marti used to call it, to fight against an imperialist government that not only does not represent us, but that actively harms us. But Noah, I wanted to play this video, get your thoughts on it, especially in conjunction with how it is that U.S. imperialism, ExxonMobil are seeing the addition, the incorporation of the Essequibo to Venezuelan territory, a longtime enemy of U.S. imperialism, because any government that wants sovereignty, that wants its resources to work for their people, that wants to oppose the influence of U.S. imperialism and American and other foreign multinationals coming in and destroying their people, keeping them poor while they get filthy rich. Any country that does that becomes the enemy of the U.S. empire. But let's listen into this real quick. I'll get your thoughts and reflect on it in conjunction with how you think that the U.S. empire and ExxonMobil, via the government of Guyana, which it basically owns, is going to act in the region following the incorporation of the Essequibo as the 24th state.
Let's do it.
That was discovered off the shores of Guyana. That's the fastest growing economy projected for the next 5 years at 25% GDP growth. Heavy crude in Venezuela. So with the potential, I'll go to back to the resources of the region. Over 50% of the soybean in the globe is from this region. Over 30% of the sugar, beef, corn is coming from this region. How do we help this region reach a potential to feed and fuel the world? But when you talk about these resources that are there, and we ask ourselves why the investment in all of the critical infrastructure by our strategic competitor, the People's Republic of China. So why is that? Well, the resources are there. This megaport that the PRC is building right now north of Lima, Peru, will take off 15 days to get food. They get 36% of their food from this region. It'll take 15 days off of that transit time, from 35 days down to 20. They won't have to go to Mexico or go to San Diego before they go to China. Now it'll be just a direct shot. Why is that? That's the PRC's plan, the gateway to Asia. But where are we coming up with the alternative solution for all of the critical infrastructure? Why are we not competing on the contracts and the tenders that these countries put out? Why is it only the PRC that's doing that? How are we mobilizing Team USA to come forward and to compete for these contracts? And I would say with the administration's announcement of the APEP, American Partnership for Economic Prosperity, where 12 Latin American leaders were brought to the White House on the 3rd of November. And so, billions of dollars being channeled through the Inter-American Development Bank and the Developmental Finance Corporation into the hemisphere, specifically for critical infrastructure, is huge. It's a start. But we got to do more. We got to double down, and we got to see the importance of this regional hemispheric security doctrine that we need to put our foot on the gas and double down, and it's a call to action.
So as the comrades say, they're not even trying to hide it and pretend like it's defense. It's clear, profit driven. It's clearly rooted in political economy and imperialism. But Noah, your thoughts, especially in conjunction with how you think the U.S. empire is going to act now after the incorporation of Essequibo as the 24th state of Venezuela.
Yeah, I think she said it all, right? She said it all. Their interest is in preventing the Chinese getting food more cheaply into Asia, in preventing Chinese trade with this entire region. And why do you think they were in Ukraine putting that forward, right? What did they blow up? They blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, Russian energy getting all through Europe. Why? And they say the same thing, right? They say, well, now they'll have to explore the rich natural gas reserves coming from the U.S., right? Always, 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 always about the bottom line. It is. And where we're talking about Essequibo, we're talking about a nation which is in danger of debt distress to the IMF, right? And they've been writing reports about this every year for years. And when they find that oil in 2015, I think, those reports change. They're all saying, oh, we project record GDP growth, right? All based on this oil production. All of it based on this oil production. It's always about the money. They don't care about the Guyanese people. I mean, it was British Guyana, right? They don't care about the people who were torn from the other people of the region just by the British arbitrarily drawing a line. And so I think what we're going to see, and we're already beginning to see it, is just a propaganda spin with little behind it. You know how many times I've heard Venezuelan imperialism today, which is maybe the silliest phrase I've heard in a long time. Venezuelan imperialism? What on earth are you talking about? They're going to try to flip it as if, one, the relationship in question is not ExxonMobil and the super majors and on one side and Venezuela on the other. They're going to try to flip that to say it's actually Guyana and Venezuela. That's the first thing they'll do. The second is that they're going to frame Venezuela as doing this out of nowhere. They're the evil ones going for the oil, right? But just follow the money. Who was paying for this legal battle at the ICJ, right? It was ExxonMobil. I mean, come on, they've got Ali just bent over a barrel here. It's sad.
You're absolutely right. And, we have a common sense saying here in the U.S., which is follow the money. Most Americans understand that you follow the money, you get at the root of why X, Y, or Z is being done. And one of the largest travesties, as you mentioned, is the amount of people that speak about it in terms of imperialism from the so-called left. This is why here at the Midwestern Marx Institute, as an educational institute, we always promote that it's not enough for us to have right opinions on certain events. It's not enough to be correct and to have the truth occasionally. We have to develop the outlook that allows us to have the truth consistently. The outlook, the dialectical materialist outlook, whose whole basis is our ability to reproduce the concrete concretely in our minds. And if you want to avoid being the sort of person that looks back at your political involvement and says, well, I was right on the question of China, but I was wrong on the question of Ukraine, and then I was right on the question of Palestine, but I was wrong on the question of Venezuela. If you want to avoid that inconsistency, if you want your judgment to be knowledge and not just right opinions, again, this important distinction brought forth already by the ancient Greeks, you need to develop the dialectical materialist outlook. So, brother, I wanted to, unless you have a comment on that. Go ahead.
Real quick, brother. This is so unbelievably important that we aren't stuck in the land of belief where we're just believing this person or that person. The reason we can get this right, and I'm not speaking of just us at the Institute, but all of us, the reason we can get this right is because we understand what imperialism is, how it comes into being, and the difference between an outcome of imperialism, such as the invasion of Iraq, and something else altogether, such as the reincorporation of Venezuelan territory back into Venezuela. Right?
Or the Russian special, or the Russian special military operations, right?
Precisely. Because if you're just believing, you're just letting them misinform you on what imperialism even is. Because what is imperialism? Right? It is capitalism advancing to its monopoly stage. All the other stuff is because of this. That is the core of it.
Absolutely, with the predominance of finance capital and and it's a globalization beyond what anything Lenin could have even imagined, especially after the Second World War and the development of what I would consider a form of neo-imperialism, a higher stage of imperialism itself, with the IMF, the World Bank, and other such institutions. Comrade Ross says, follow the money. And if you follow the money for the Institute, you usually end up at Comrade Ross. He's the sugar daddy of the Institute, our Soros. That's we're obviously joking. Ross is a great comrade, and thank you so much for the contribution. And again, the Institute is a grassroots funded institute, so these donations are tremendously appreciated. Noah, I wanted to go to our next segment. So we know that there have been not just U.S. but Western boots on the ground in Ukraine for a while, basically since the beginning of the special military operations. But now that it's coming to an end, that everyone agrees unanimously, even the a large chunk of the Ukrainian leadership has admitted it, that the war is over, that Russia has won. There's and it's ended up in the same way that we predicted it was going to end up, and with tremendous suffering, a lot of deaths, and Russia eventually winning. But the U.S. has always been clear that it wants to fight till the last Ukrainian. But now here's something of a whole different nature. Here's Joe Biden raising the possibility of American troops fighting Russian troops in the case that Russia supposedly invades a NATO state, which I don't think that's likely at all. Russia is not an imperialist power invading other countries. But let's listen in, and I want to get your thoughts after on the possibilities that you see of something like this occurring, and how likely is it to intensify the already contradictory and revolutionarily pregnant state that we're in the U.S. as working people. But let's listen into Biden and then give me your thoughts.
Well, we've committed as a NATO member that we defend every inch of NATO territory. Then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO. Well, we've committed as a NATO.
So that is very scary discourse that we haven't heard yet, but
yeah, they're floating the idea, right? What this seems designed to me to do is gauge the reaction of people. And you know what? There is no better way to get anyone who didn't already side against our ruling class here against them, and to start hating the Nazi Banderite scum they have used as their puppets in Ukraine right now, than to put American troops there. Everybody will be like, not our sons and daughters, not our fathers and mothers, not our brothers and sisters. No, thank you. I mean, and that's not, some sort of chauvinistic thing. It's just, these are the people we know. It's easy for them to fool people, or easier for them to fool people when it's all over there. They can say, oh, they're not really Nazis. And it's just people you'll never meet that are in abstract to you dying in service of our prophets. But when it's the people on your block, when it's the people that raised you or that you raised, that's a whole nother bag of bananas, my friend. Whole nother bag of bananas.
Love it. The famous Khachvikian dictum of bag of bananas. Thank you so much for coming on, brother. Those are all the questions I had prepared for you today. Anything you'd like to plug before you depart?
Man, I feel like a real guest. I'm getting asked questions. I get my picture big. That usually don't happen. No, I'm good. Really,
We're filming you.
If you want to see my recent interviews on RT about Venezuela, it's really me doing it because Eddie's been so busy. He's kind of our Venezuela expert. He's training for really, really big wrestling events. But check those out on RT. We can't put them up on our YouTube because we'll get demonetized. We also have another, I guess, semester of basics of Marxism beginning soon. There is one organization who's going to be sending a lot of students, so we're sort of coordinating with them. As soon as that's ironed out 100%, we'll announce the dates, we'll open up for signups and all that good stuff. But other than that, yeah, I'm going to listen to this as I go to bed. So have a great rest of your night, brother, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'm like talking to him like I'm getting off the phone. Have a great rest of your show, brother. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you, comrade. We'll be talking to you tomorrow. That was the legendary Noah Khachvik. It's that class that he teaches basics of Marxism, man. That's you won't get anything like that literally anywhere unless you perhaps go to China and sign up for their Marxism schools. But it's incredibly important. And as we were just discussing, there's a very fundamental difference between us getting correct opinions on things and various events, and then us having the world view that allows us, that gives us the confidence to be right when new events arise, similar as to the ones that we've been constantly seeing and discussing. But I have a very secret guest for our next discussion. We're going to be talking about some of the very ridiculous propaganda that is being said about the DPRK now, literally in your face, turning reality upside down. So a very clear example of bourgeois ideology, false consciousness, the turning of reality upside down. We'll also be discussing some other stories out of Palestine, recent former Hamas hostages who have came out saying that they feared more the Israeli bombs than they did Hamas, of course, especially since it's been clear since October 7th that Israel extended its Hannibal directive to including civilians, not just soldiers that they'll kill if they're caught by enemies, but civilians as well. So these hostages were definitely correct in having that fear, because a good chunk of the civilians killed on October 7th were by the hands of Israeli tanks and helicopters and IDF soldiers. And we'll discuss also other stories concerning Palestine. And yes, it's the Secret Santa of the Midwestern Marx Institute. We're going to be bringing him now in a couple seconds, just waiting for him to for them to reappear on the camera. Okay, I've been told that I need to keep it going keep the build up on for. Oh, he's ready to go. So here is the secret guest, the legendary Eddie Liger Smith. How you doing, brother?
Good. Glad to be with you today.
Absolutely glad to have you on. I've missed you, man. It's been, I think it hasn't ever been this long a period where our YouTube watchers haven't seen you.
I know, bro. It's been crazy. I've just been trying to do the TikToks when I can, but it's literally, I have to wrestle twice a day and then usually run 2 practices a day. So that's like 8 hours of wrestling, and then got the US Open coming up in 2 weeks, and then hopefully I'll be free to do more YouTube content. But yeah, I'm glad I got to hop on tonight.
Absolutely. So I wanted to first go to a story coming out of the DPRK. Well, the story is itself coming out of, I believe, France. But it says, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un crying like a baby. They always have to throw that in. It's kind of like Trump. Al-Baghdadi, he died like a dog. Crying like a baby while addressing an audience of women during an event at the headquarters of the Communist Party. He was asking the women to have more kids for the good of the party, the revolution, and the country. So this story has been painted by the tabloid propagandists as Kim Jong-un crying in the process of asking women, please have more babies, like some former, pathetic simp thing. And here's a little bit of the clip.
보고자는 이렇듯 고결한 인생관을 지닌 여성들의 대우가 나날이 늘어나.
So obviously, none of us speak the language, so it wouldn't make much sense to keep it rolling much longer. But here's an actual contextualizing comment from Comrade Stu. Kim was crying because another person, a woman, as you can clearly see in the audience, and there's a lot of them crying as well, most of them are crying, was giving a detailed account of the treatment of women under Japanese occupation of Korea, particularly in the Second World War period. So again, literally turning reality on its head, making it seem as this horrible dictator was forcing women to have children. The population is going down, and he's crying because he's forced to do something horrible. And he's actually crying because he's a deeply empathetic person who actually gives a shit about the crimes that were done to his people, and especially to the women, the crimes that were waged on women by the Japanese imperialists. So the people of the DPRK are amongst the most dehumanized by imperialist propaganda, and this is another example of it. But Eddie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. In that Visegrad 24 account, I don't know, it'd be interesting to track the origins of that and see how they emerged. But I first became aware of them during the Russia-Ukraine war, and they were one of the biggest accounts pushing Ukrainian propaganda, NATO propaganda, anti-Russia propaganda. And then as soon as the conflict in Palestine breaks out, they immediately side with Israel, which is interesting. It's just a sign, that the imperialist forces, or the biggest imperialist forces in the world, side with the Nazi fascist government in Ukraine and with the fascist ethno-state that is Israel. But yeah, and then of course it's not surprising to see the same account spreading lies and nonsense about the DPRK. We see that the forces of imperialism are united against Palestine, against the DPRK, against Russia, against these countries who are fighting back against U.S. global political dominance and economic dominance. So yeah, interesting. And that Comrade Stu, he does a good job of debunking a lot of anti-communist myths on Twitter.
Absolutely, and Eddie, you've done a lot of good work going into the specificities of how it is that the propaganda apparatuses are created and dispense some of these ridiculous stories that come out about North Korea, the People's Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and we have other videos that we can point the audience to so that they can get that in-depth analysis concerning how Jewish necromancy and other similar phenomenons work. But I wanted to hop on to our next segment. This is, last Sunday, the last alone stream that I did, I covered how the Hamas hostages were speaking about the treatment of Hamas. And, there was a lady who was saying that they treated my daughter like a queen, and who ended up condemning the bombing of Gaza and the treatment of the Palestinians by the Israeli apartheid occupational force. There was someone else who explicitly said that she did not want to meet with Netanyahu and that she condemned what's going on in Gaza. And the vast majority of the people that were held hostage have not been allowed to go in front of a camera. So this was something that was predicted. A lot of these people grew up with a caricature image of what the Palestinians were and what Hamas was. They're being compared to ISIS, to the Nazis. And when they see the humanity of people guided by the principles of Islam, which, a lot of them overlap with some of our social principles and ethics as Marxists, it breaks down that ideological barrier, that dehumanization that has been central for the Israeli state getting consent from its people. So here's another example of that. And surprise, surprise, it's coming out on CNN, but let's listen into what they're saying.
Tonight, CNN has learned that former Hamas hostages had a contentious with Israeli officials today. One of them telling the Israeli security cabinet, quote, "What I see on TV scares me a lot. I see Israeli bombings there, and you have no idea what the tactics are. I was in a house surrounded by explosions. We slept in the tunnels, and we feared not Hamas, but that Israel might kill us, and then it would have been Hamas killed you."
Even on CNN, huh?
Even on CNN.
Remember, dude, in the debate with Destiny, he said the only sources saying that Israel killed their own civilians or fired on their own civilians were from TikTok and Twitter. Now it's even mainstream sources. Can't deny that.
Well, yeah, the reports have shown that what basically is going on is that the Hannibal Directive that Israel has had for decades, which says that when their soldiers are captured by the enemy, they have the right to carry forth the operation against the enemy, even if it means killing their own soldiers. It's been extended to civilians. And that's, I think, very clearly what we've seen, not just in October 7th, but what these people have feared when they've been held hostage, that the bombs are going to land on them. They end up fearing not the people who they have just removed the dehumanization that they were socialized into, but the bombs of their own government, the government that they were raised to love and admire. I wanted to perhaps go to another segment, but Eddie, you had also planned on speaking a little bit about the history of labor Zionism. I know it's getting late and you've had a few practices today. So would you be interested in telling the audience a bit about what labor Zionism is? It's a topic that I don't think we've ever covered on stream. I know we've published some articles on it, but what is labor Zionism and what role does it play today in certain iterations or attempts to defend Israel from a pseudo-progressive standpoint?
Yeah, it's a really important concept to understand for us as communists and socialists, because there are people who will describe Israel today as, socialist or communist, and that's been a thing since since Zionism became a thing in the late 1800s. There have always been these labor Zionists who say that we need to colonize Palestine, not through violence, but through labor and through developing the land. But of course, at the end of the day, they still support the founding of the Jewish state, which says in its founding documents that it supports a Jewish majority. And the founding of that state takes place on top of Palestine, where there's an Arab majority. So there's this contradiction there that the labor Zionists can't get around, where in order to found the state of Israel, which they support at the end of the day, albeit with all this rhetoric about not being for, expelling Palestinians, they're for this state that creates a Jewish majority. So in practice, they end up participating in and supporting all these mass expellings, compulsory expulsion of Palestinians, and the demolition of homes. They just, sometimes criticize it, sometimes dress it up with progressive rhetoric, sometimes buy into these myths and lies that every Israeli war of expansion or Israeli settlement was done in self-defense or was created in self-defense. And I recommend people who want to learn about these myths and get a really foundational understanding of the conflict, check out Norman Finkelstein's Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, which goes through what's actually the real history of Israel, their founding and their expansion, versus the Zionist history that's often given. And he focuses on labor Zionism pretty heavily, and how at the end of the day, labor Zionists support the founding of an ethno-state. So they can't get around, being in favor of violence and apartheid. And, of course, I believe it was Ingalls who said people can't be free while they're oppressing another people. You can't have a socialist state that's a neo-colonial outpost of the U.S. committing a genocide. That's not socialism. That's ethno-nationalism, because the Palestinian Arabs are not having their material needs met, and in fact, it's quite the opposite. So I actually did a TikTok here to try and illustrate this point through like a skit. I just whipped this up like 6 minutes before practice and kind of rushed it, so it's not my best work, but hopefully it'll help illustrate the point I'm trying to make here. And of course, people should read this book if they want a more in-depth understanding of what labor Zionists actually argue and the kind of massacres and mass expulsions of Palestinians that they've supported in practice.
I am a Zionist. What does that mean? I think that the Jewish people should have their own state, which should be founded in Palestine. Okay, what is your state gonna be like? Well, Well, our Jewish state needs to have a Jewish majority, so we'll allow Jews from anywhere in the world to come to our state and gain citizenship. Wait, a Jewish majority, but there's already an Arab majority in Palestine. So how are you going to change that? The Palestinians will probably just get up and leave and let us have their land.
So that was one of the major myths of the labor Zionists, especially before the 1948 partition and the Nakba. But even since then, they say, you know, the Palestinians will just get up and leave, or they'll let us have the land. And obviously that has not been the case. And a lot of times they'll say things like that, and then more extremist groups like the Irgun and these more explicitly ethno-nationalist and fascistic Zionist groups will commit the murders and demolish the homes, and the labor Zionists will look the other way, and then they'll just go and settle there. They'll be like, oh, whatever, it happened, you know, what can we do? Might as well, you know, push for economic development and socialism in this region after we just ethnically cleanse the Arabs who are living there.
Land. And if they don't, then what do you mean? What are you going to do to the Palestinians if they don't just leave and give you their land? We're just going to make a move. Oh, yeah, you're just going to make them move? How are you going to do that? Well, you know, there are some Zionists, not me, I'm not one of these, who want to kill or expel the Arabs, to force them out. Oh, yeah, but you don't support that, right? No, I'm a labor Zionist, so I just support founding the Israeli state with a Jewish majority. How do you create a Jewish majority when there's already an Arab majority without using force and violence? Well, the thing is, you saying that is just highly anti-Semitic. What you're saying is that you want to create an ethno-state on top of Palestine. More anti-Semitism. I am a Zionist. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's basically it. They'll deny or claim to not support the worst crimes of Israel, but at the same time support the founding of Israel, which could only be done through the mass expelling of Palestinians.
Yeah, and we're seeing the resurfacing of ideas, not just like labor Zionism, but others that are trying to paint Israel in somehow a progressive light, because they've lost the youth. You know, the youth is looking at a futureless future, and they're seeing their government send billions of dollars to fund the genocide. And who the hell is going to support that when they're seeing on their phone the reality of Palestinian deaths? You know, almost 9,000 Palestinians have been killed. Palestinian children have been killed in less than 60 days. The rate at which children are being killed is higher than that at which they were being killed during the Nazi Holocaust. So what person that aligns their interests and their political opinions with humanity, with the people, is ever going to be in favor of the Israeli occupational apartheid state?
Yes, great points. And that last video that we showed was me kind of mocking what the labor Zionists were up to in 1948, you know, claiming to be socialists while supporting the founding of an ethno-state on top of Palestine. But I did a video a while back, and this was actually months and months ago, that kind of shows what labor Zionists are up to nowadays and the kind of propaganda they push about Israel nowadays, and trying to make it seem like a fantastic progressive place.
Never worked except in this place.
He said communism has never worked except in this place. They go, welcome to Israel.
You've got to be kidding me. These guys are repackaging Zionism, trying to make it appear progressive and then selling it to you on TikTok. Come be a settler in communist Israel, where we share all the houses after we force the Palestinians out of them. Communism is when we shoot missiles at places where children are playing, apparently. And this is a common tactic of Zionists when they're trying to sell apartheid and settler colonialism to Westerners who have bankrolled it forever. The U.S. gives Israel at least $3 billion a year. They've also talked about things like intersectional Zionism or labor Zionism, as if a settler colonial project forcing people off their homes and enforcing an apartheid could be progressive or even communist. What an absolute joke, dude. Free Palestine.
Oh my God, the Matrix messing with us there, with the video production. But yeah, I mean, I don't see people falling for it. The information war has very clearly been lost by the Zionists, and The propaganda has gotten extremely bad, and we covered it earlier, but Lloyd Austin mentioned it earlier this week that Israel's losing the strategic war. We have UN officials coming out and appealing to the 99th article of the UN in order for us to receive a ceasefire. So not only is the global majority on the side of Palestine, but the leaders of the imperialist powers are having to realize that, at some point, you can't continue with a funding of a genocide that your people overwhelmingly are against. But Eddie, how do you see this playing out in the future? These contradictions being so apparent.
Between, you mean with between labor Zionism as an idea and the state of Israel?
Well, with the fact that the global majority has currently shown itself to be against the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians, there's a lot of pressure, or not a lot of pressure, but statements that weren't being made 50-something days ago by Western leaders that are being made now. How much longer do you think a process like this, a genocidal process like this, can keep going?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. A lot of people I've heard speculating that this could be the end of Israel because they are losing the propaganda war so bad. And I mean, anyone who's been following Israeli internal politics at all knows that there's been this like rightward shift. And of course, as we just described, all Zionism is right wing. The progressive or labor Zionism is just a mask for murderous settler colonialism and apartheid. But with time, the more openly fascistic elements of Israeli politics have taken control of the state. And Netanyahu is not well loved within Israel. He's been charged with corruption and is largely unpopular. So in order to stay in power, he's formed a coalition with the likes of Naftali Bennett and these people who are just, gleefully cheering on collective punishment of people in Gaza, including civilians and children. So these are the kind of the people who are now in charge of the Israeli government. And as I'm reading this book and reading about, say, the policy of the U.S. under Ronald Reagan towards Israel versus what Joe Biden's policy is, the U.S. would often scold Israel if they got too aggressive, right? And Israel was always aggressive and expansionist, but not always as brazen as they are today. So that's only going to turn public opinion against them more. They look more and more like this rogue fascistic state, just openly committing a genocide. But what mechanisms are there to intervene? International law under global capitalism is a joke. There's no way to punish Israel so long as they have the backing of the United States, which literally has been a Zionist strategy from day one. From day one, the intelligent Zionists leading the project said, we need the backing of a great power. We need the backing of the United Kingdom or the U.S. So they make themselves useful to the U.S. by protecting their economic and political interests in the region. They lobby the U.S. through lobbies like AIPAC, but that's not the only reason that the U.S. supports Israel. Their interests are aligned in general. So Israel is then propped up by the U.S., which makes it difficult to punish them or sanction them or do anything. So, public opinion is going to continue to turn against them, but will that lead to the genocide being stopped? I don't know.
Yeah, all fair points, brother. It's I guess we'll see. Something's going to have to happen within the coming weeks. I think most geopolitical analysts are saying that there's no way that this could keep going for much longer. But we know the extremes that imperialism is willing to go to in order to achieve its ends. I have a couple more stories to go through. We'll be covering them together. I wanted to first thank Battle Cossacks, the comrade from Argentina. Alejandro Caldevenos from the Korean Friendship Association of Spain has been arrested by the FBI for allegedly aiding the DPRK. I did see that. I shared some of the posts from our comrades in various parties who have been in close contact with Alejandro Cao. He's someone who I used to watch his videos when I was first learning about the DPRK. And it's very sad to see. And if there's any way that we can show any more solidarity with the comrade, we will do that. And for the next stream plan, I will have a story on Alejandro Cao, and hopefully someone who can come and talk to us about specifically what happened and why he's being persecuted. But the next story I wanted to discuss, and perhaps I can wait for Eddie to come in, but one of the things that has boiled my blood the most since October 7th, basically, has been the liberals who, in times of relative peace, because I don't know how you call peace the situation that the West Bank and Gaza are under, but in times explicit, open, intensified genocide, they pay lip service to a support for the Palestinian plight. But then when a people that are pushed into conditions akin to a concentration camp, a people that are colonized, that are occupied, that are blockaded, unlike any other country in the world, when people like this break out after peaceful struggles have completely failed, you have so-called socialists condemn them for not participating in mass demonstration or democratic politics, as Megan Day, the editor for Jacobin, did. We had a segment covering the futility of that, and there's been many others. And a couple of days after October 7th, I wrote an article precisely criticizing this phenomenon. And one of the things that I constantly reiterate is the fact that none of these people who today are trying to play this bullshit, nuanced, both sidesism game, condemn Hamas on one side and on the other side condemn Israel, what positions would they have against a Nat Turner rebellion? What positions would they have against an Algerian anti-colonial struggle? What positions would they have against South Africa's struggle against apartheid? What side would they be on? So one of the things that I wanted to show was precisely how a figure like Nelson Mandela, universally admired and recognized to be a hero of the struggle against apartheid, how he thought of Palestinian resistance and mentioned that just like in his struggle, it is never the oppressed that come to violence first. The oppressed are left with only one option, and when that one option is violence, that's when they take that option, and they're right to take it, because nothing beats the struggle for freedom, the struggle against occupation, the struggle against colonialism. So let's hear it in Mandela's words themselves, and let's think about these people that are condemning Palestine for the route that they've been forced to take with Hamas in order to struggle for their freedom. Wouldn't they also be condemning people like Mandela? And then let's reflect. Are these so-called democratic socialists, these petty bourgeois middle-class moralists, are they actually as on the right side of history, as morally as they think they are? Or is it the complete opposite, that they're attempting to be neutral on a moving train, something you cannot do, as Howard Zinn correctly taught us? But let's listen in on Mandela.
Choose peace rather than confrontation, except in cases where we cannot proceed, where we cannot move forward. Then, if the only alternative is violence, we will use violence.
So the same part of the wall that the Al-Aqsa flood broke through was a place that was the destination of these large peace marches in 2018, 2019, where hundreds of thousands of people were injured, hundreds died because of Israeli snipers. So when you have a peace march and they literally shoot you and kill you and injure thousands of you, what other alternative do you have in a situation where you don't have clean water? They limit your access to food. You can't escape. It's been literally described by leading Israeli officials themselves as a concentration camp, as an open-air prison by Human Rights Watch and other international organizations. So what other alternative would you have than violent struggle? But here come the Western liberal moralists to condemn Hamas and supposedly Israel at the same time. But Eddie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was writing this week about anti-imperialism in hindsight, and this is just such a good example. The Nelson Mandela is a good example, and the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Nat Turner is a good example. There are other ones like John Brown, who nowadays a lot of people pretend like are their heroes, and openly express support for these anti-colonial or anti-slavery revolts and struggles, even though civilians were killed in a lot of them. And it's so easy to do that years later. Years later, when we have, when we can look back in hindsight and see that it was a struggle against an oppressive system, and it was violence, that was the last recourse, the last resort. And in a lot of cases, like with the American Civil War, it was ultimately violence that was needed to bring an end to the system of slavery. So there are so many people who do that, but then they condemn the Palestinians and they condemn Hamas and they condemn any liberatory group taking up arms to struggle against oppression or apartheid or colonization. And it's so useless, because it's like, we need you to stand up for these people when they're fighting their struggle, when the propagandists are trying to demonize these people and turn people against them. That's when we need you to stand up for the people fighting the anti-colonial struggle. We don't need you to stand up for Nat Turner 200 years later. Slavery's already over, right? That doesn't take any courage. We've already had the benefit of history to teach us that slavery was an evil, oppressive, hyper-exploitative system that needed to come to an end, and justified violence from the perspective of the slaves. So who were being systematically deprived of their freedom. So it's this lack of structural analysis, though. People just get swept up in the propaganda. And that's why, the point of my planned pamphlet or article or whatever on anti-imperialism and hindsight is to say, have a theoretical understanding of imperialism, so you know how to stand against capitalist imperialism, which is what we're facing. That's what Israel is a manifestation of. Have that understanding so that you can not be an anti-imperialist in hindsight, but you can be an anti-imperialist when it matters, because it does matter, as we're seeing now. Enough people have educated themselves about the Israel-Palestine conflict to make a real difference and really combat the propaganda. So we need to get, that level of theoretical education and understanding on all issues.
You're absolutely right, brother. I wanted to get at this super chat from Battle Kozaks. Thank you so much again, brother, for the 20 Argentinian dollar super chat. Maybe if Malai goes through with dollarizing Argentina, they'll be U.S. dollars. But what does Nazbo mean? Where does it come from? Well, it's not a history I've dug too deep into, but it comes after the fall of the Soviet Union with the National Bolshevik Party, a party that even in their logo, they were trying to combine the Nazi red flag with the white circle with the hammer and sickle. So it was an attempt at a sort of red-brown alliance, a combination of ideas from Nazi Germany and National Socialism with socialism. And of course, when you try to do that, the substance of socialism is completely removed. But the relevance of the Nazbol term today is that it's used as a way to discredit people who are not willing to cross out, condemn, cancel working class folks that are on the right, that have certain socially conservative views, or people that are willing to, in our age of social media, do the sort of events that give socialistic ideas exposure with crowds that are not used to listening to those ideas, folks perhaps in the conservative right or something. So it's used as a way to cancel people who are not willing to have a purity fetish where they only speak to people that they already agree with, or people who have certain liberal sensibilities on cultural issues.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. Is in the West, it's just
Yeah.
become an insult. A way to say that you support, a red-brown alliance. And of course, the people who often get called Nazbols are people who would, of course, condemn the Nazbol party and condemn any kind of real red-brown alliance. But if you talk about reaching out to working people, you're going to get accused of supporting a red-brown alliance nowadays, because there are people who legitimately think that pretty much all the workers are fascists. But it's just absurd. So, yeah.
You would almost flip it on them, and the people that do hold those positions, since they're actively acting objectively in the interest of imperialism and a rapidly fascistifying American imperialist state, in condemning the people that actually want to reach working people, regardless of their current ideological positions. They're the ones that are in bed with the imperialists, with the right, with the Browns, with the fascists. With the Nazi sympathizers, and it's very clear they're sympathizing with Nazi Israel, carrying forth the genocide. The rate of which they're killing children is quicker than the Nazis in Germany and during the Holocaust. And they're sympathizing with literal Nazis in Ukraine that they've been supporting for 2 years. So if anyone is actually supporting the Red-Brown Alliance and acting in ways akin to Nazbo ideology, it's those people who condemn the people that want to incorporate as many working class people into the movement as possible, and in so doing act in the interest of imperialism.
YouTube is going to have a new word on their banned list after this stream.
Fascistifying. That's a great concept.
Monetized.
I'm proud I just developed it here on the spot. But the next story I wanted to cover is a little bit of an emotional one. It's Roger Waters describing in a teary-eyed manner the experience that he's had giving a concert in the West Bank, and how he feels about the plight of the Palestinians and the conditions that they're forced into. And I know that these are sentiments and ways of feeling that I definitely relate to, and that perhaps the vast majority, if not every single one of our viewers does. But let's listen into Roger Waters, someone with tremendous courage, because it's so easy to be silent when you have the positions that he has. But he has the courage to risk getting certain forms of repression. He wasn't able to stay in certain hotels in Argentina and Chile. So let's listen into what he has to say.
Like anybody with a heart, I spend my life teetering on the verge of tears. Because you can't possibly put yourself in that position, in their position, those mothers and fathers, those children, those 2.3 million, well, a bit less now, people living in Gaza, being bombarded by F-16s day and night, week after week after week. One cannot even begin to imagine what it must be like. 2005, I think. The show was sold out, and I cancelled that show, having heard that, Highcombe Park is built on a Palestinian graves and blah, and blah. But I came to some kind of internal compromise because I knew very little about what was going on in Palestine. And I moved the gig to a agricultural community where they grow chickpeas. I went back the next year and went on an extended tour, and we went all over the West Bank, and it was chilling beyond anything that I could ever have imagined to see back then in 2006 what was going on, and the absolute disdain. I remember thinking at the time, if they're like that to me, what must they be like to the Palestinians? And of course we know. And now, to bring it entirely up to date, we know exactly what they're like to the Palestinians, because they are, as we speak, committing genocide in Gaza. It's quite clear to anyone with half a brain that they are committing genocide. I'm happy to say that almost the whole of the rest of the world is going, nada más, stop. No, don't ceasefire for 4 days. You must stop the killing. It has to stop. It clearly, this Zionist experiment in the Holy Land has now officially failed.
Yeah, that's the second celebrity I've heard now saying that their trip to the West Bank turned them against Israel, which is, they do these guided tours to try and indoctrinate people with Zionist propaganda. I know relatives who have gone on them, and it works. But there are, keen-eyed celebrities who go and see the apartheid firsthand and see that, as Adam Friedland said, comedian and podcaster, that the Israeli citizens are living in like gated communities in these beautiful homes. It looks like it's Orange County, and the Palestinians are living in slums or living in ghettos. And for me, I obviously sided with the Palestinians originally, but then I was challenged by some Zionists who said, come have a Zoom chat with us. And I sat down on Zoom, me and a good buddy of Carlos and mine, sat down on a Zoom with these IDF members, and I'll never forget.
3 years ago, by the way. Yeah.
What?
3 years ago. It wasn't like after. It was for the
before we had even started the institute. And the way they talked about Palestinians was insane. They're all terrorists. They want to kill me and my family. I have to get the Arabs before they get me. Blah, blah, blah. And laughing about killing them and pride and killing Arab people. And it was just disgusting. And it was, obvious that they were trying to convince me to support Israel, and what they did was the opposite. But that story is being repeated by a lot of people now. They look at Israel, and what they see disgusts them.
Right. Any rational person that listens to Israeli arguments is more likely to be convinced that the Palestinians are right than the Israelis. Very heartwarming video from Roger Waters, someone who stands consistently on the right side of history, who's been standing with the Palestinians from the start. Just depicting these things that we've been talking about. There's no way that, unless you've distorted your humanity to unrecognizable extents, there's no way that you could see what's going on in Gaza and support it. And it's scary because, as we showed in a poll Sunday, 60-something% of Israelis think that their government is not using enough force against the people of Gaza. 37%, or 57%, 37% think that they're using adequate force, and 1.8%, only 1.8%, are saying that the government is using too much force. That means that there's basically unanimous support for the genocide that's going on in Gaza, with the exception of 2% that maybe would like the genocide to be a little slower. But it's ridiculous. It's been a population that has been indoctrinated, that has been enslaved, and all they've been able to see has been the shadows on the cave. They have a very distorted and upside down view of reality, and they have been deeply dehumanized. And as the quote from Dioniso Yupanqui, you mentioned it earlier, Eddie, no people that oppresses another can themselves be free. In doing this to the Palestinians, as the Socratic tradition teaches us, they are damaging their souls, or damaging their humanity. There's no way that you can be fully human when the premise of your humanity is dehumanizing a group of people and murdering them at the scale at which the Israelis are doing so.
Right. I think anybody who is not supporting Palestine at this point is not even trying to put themselves in the shoes of the Palestinians. They're not even trying. Like, you have, and that applies both to the pro-Israel liberals, like the one I debated, Destiny. He's just like, I'm going to play my video games and enjoy living in America and go on streams and say I'm pro-genocide. Ha ha ha. I'm not even going to try and put myself in their shoes or take this issue seriously or take their suffering seriously. but the Zionists have learned how to do that systematically, right? They've dehumanized the Palestinians systematically, and they've been educated to not see the Palestinians as fully human. So it's almost impossible for them to put themselves in the shoes of the Palestinians because they've drank the Kool-Aid so much of this Zionist propaganda. And it's disgusting. I mean, there's nothing else to call it except fascism. Like, fascism is a difficult word to define, but like, this is it, wanting to found an ethno state, a state within its legal framework says we want a Jewish majority, the only state in the world that works like that. So explicitly an ethno state, that is systematically expelling and ethnically cleansing Arab Palestinians. Like, what do you call that other than fascism when the people of that country are cheering it on? And, again, going back to people being anti-imperialist in hindsight, there's all these people who think they would have been against Hitler and fascist Germany. Like, you don't think they had propagandists who were tricking gullible people like you into thinking that Hitler and the Nazis were the good guys? That was what they were really good at. And that's what the fascists are really good at today. And they've got a lot of liberals, less and less, which is good, but they've got a lot of liberals still supporting a fascist ethno state. And it is wild to watch.
Yeah, it's completely abhorrent. The other state that has a similar law to that is Ukraine, another fascist state. The last question that we have here in terms of super chats, we went through all of our stream plan. We got some great interviews in. But the last question that we have is anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism bill is now in effect. Eddie Carlos, Noah Shaw are all anti-Semites according to U.S. law. Be prepared to be canceled. Well, we've been canceled since we've even had the capacity of being canceled. So that's not one of our worries. But this is something scary. We covered it. I covered it, I believe, last week, the first day that the vote came into question. And, it's ridiculous that even people who have been leading in terms of elected officials, the fight for a ceasefire, voted in favor of it, with the exception of Rashida Tlaib, that fucking voted present. The only person that voted against it was a Kentucky Republican, Thomas Massey. But Rashida Tlaib, the reasons why she voted present should make you even angrier, because she voted present basically because the bill doesn't do enough of a good job on presenting the accurate history of the Palestinian people and their right to the land and Israeli occupation, which should be all the more reason for her to vote against it and not present, which is effectively a vote in favor if you really think about it. How can you be neutral on these things? Something very akin to AOC's vote present for the funding of the Iron Dome, and the rest of the squad voted in favor of considering critiques of Zionism to be anti-Semitic. That means that all of the actions that they've had for a ceasefire, all of the whatever, even liberal critiques that they've given of the Zionist apartheid occupational force, they're admitting that they cannot defend themselves to be not anti-Semitic by accepting and voting in favor of this bill. So it's a complete disgrace, and it shows the vacillational character, if you wish, of the Social Democrats.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, the bill explicitly says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It explicitly says that, which is like, as Battle Cossack is saying, so the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress now considers Noah Khachvik to be anti-Semitic officially. He's a Jewish man. Or Orthodox rabbi. I don't know this guy's first name. Yaakov Shapiro. Orthodox rabbi who believes that Zionism is a perversion of Judaism and opposes Zionism on explicitly religious grounds as a Jewish rabbi. He is anti-Semitic. He is bigoted towards Jewish people, according to the U.S. government. A rabbi. And that we live in a country where 45,000 people are dying every year because they don't have health care. People are drowning in medical debt. They're drowning in student debt. People can't pay their rent. 80% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck. And this is what Congress is doing. Making laws or passing resolutions that declare Jewish rabbis to be anti-Semites. Like, it's beyond beyond parity. But of course, we know as Marxists, our government, and I made this point on TikTok earlier, our government isn't actually a democracy. It's not actually looking out for our best interests. It's a dictatorship of the capitalist class that serves as a tool of suppression, suppressing the speech, suppressing activism, and suppressing any forms of struggle from the bottom up. So although they pretend to be this benevolent organization that's looking out for you, they're exactly the opposite, and it's never been so obvious. And by the way, Representative Thomas Massie then stuck by his guns and tweeted this, which Democrats like Chuck Schumer were melting down about, but getting slammed for doing so. So shout out to Thomas Massie for sticking to his guns here. And I mean, this is about as based as it gets. Congress these days, no American patriotism, but they're all about the Zionism. Needs to be the opposite. Time to invest in the American workers and not send their money towards fascist apartheid states committing genocides abroad.
I couldn't have said it any better myself, brother. That's it's tragic, and you used the word there, parody. It's almost a parody, and I think that as the contradictions at the economic base of society intensify, the ideological contradictions are going to show themselves in more forms that are very evidently laughable and parody-like. But with that, we have been able to go over the whole stream plan for the day, discuss a wide array of important current events. I want to remind you all that the Midwestern Marx Institute is grassroots funded, so consider becoming a patron if you want to support us financially at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. If you become a $10 member, you get a free ebook copy of The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. As soon as you sign up, you can sign up for $1 a month. You get the link to our Midwestern Marx Institute Discord, where you can recommend stuff for us to react to, amongst other things. You could always also become a YouTube member and do other things to support us financially, buy some of the Midwestern Marx gear, buy some of our books. But thank you to all of you for watching. Thank you, Eddie, for joining us. I know you've had a very tight and busy schedule. Thank you for making time. Thank you to the guests who have now, of course, left. Thank you to Battle Kozaks for quite a few super chats. And thank you, of course, to the Institute's official sugar daddy, Ross Ian Cole, for the €20 super chat. Thank you, all of you, for watching and for sharing our content and liking it and for supporting the People's Institute, the Midwestern Marx Institute. We will have tomorrow the first ever live stream in Spanish. Danny Shaw is going to be interviewing I believe, Argentinian economist. Don't quote me on the nationality part of it, but someone who's absolutely brilliant. And then Saturday morning, Noah and myself will represent the Institute in a panel discussion hosted by the International Manifesto Group on the fateful divorce of the intellectuals and the working class, which we'll hear from the likes of folks like Radhika Desai, Gabriel Rockhill, and others. So look out for all of those things. Look out for some of our upcoming book projects, and you can keep up with all that at MidwesternMarx.com. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Eddie, for coming on. And with that, we'll roll out, as we always roll in, with the glorious and marvelous International.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.